Wow, there's 61 people in here. What? Wait, how do I do this? Wait, Command Shift 4. Oh, okay, I did it. Hello! Welcome to Digital Direct Action. It's our third one. It's my favorite number. I have to due diligence and mention that Zoom is evil and soulless, even though we're using it. I don't know about you, but I love Chinatown. I grew up here. I picked up my mom every day from work. She worked in this mall. All my appointments, all my haircuts, all my groceries, literally everything was here. And nowadays I co-parent T-Base, which is a little DIY art space in the Chinatown Center Mall. On Saturday, we canvassed Chinatown and gathered 200 signatures demanding for 100% affordable housing. Oh, heck yeah, my dude. I now know how to say affordable housing in Cantonese. 負擔得起個住房. Yeah. But I don't know how to grammatically use it in a sentence properly. So we'll figure that out. So this is, again, our third Digital Direct Actions, my favorite number. Our first one was with Butterfly, Asian and Migrant Sex Working Support Network. The second one was with Toronto Prisoners' Rights Project. And the third one is with FOCT. FOCT, yeah. Fucking FOCT it up. Sometimes people think T-Base and FOCT are the same thing, but it's not. We're more like sisters who share a lot of clothes. And if you don't know, most of you know, FOCT is a grassroots organization comprised of artists, architects, writers, journalists, business owners, residents, and community activists fighting for community-controlled, affordable housing, economic justice, and racial justice in Toronto's downtown Chinatown. We are all friends of Chinatown. Exactly, just like eyebrows, FOCT and T-Base. I'm part of FOCT and T-Base, so I have the biggest bias in that I work with the most resourceful, hilarious, clever, creative, loving, and brilliant people ever. I'm completely honored to welcome Amy Lam and Beryl Tsang.
Hi, I'm Amy. Thank you, Hanya, for the hype introduction, as always. And I'm a member of FOCT. I'm an artist, and I used to live in Chinatown. I grew up going to Chinatown. Like Hanya talked about, I'm an immigrant from Hong Kong, and Chinatown is very important to me.
I am Beryl Tsang, and I live next door to Chinatown in Kensington Market. And I've been hanging around Chinatown since about 1990s when I moved to Toronto from many different places. Anyhow, I consider this my home. And this is where I spent years raising my children and spent years being a part of the larger Chinese Canadian community here.
Wow, I love both of you so much. And, you know, Amy, we've been working together for about a year now, and I'm just wondering, like, how was FOCT formed around the current site fight happening at 315 to 325 Spadina?
Well, I would like to first give credit to the garden, which was the very first thing that kind of we worked on together, Hanya, in terms of Friends of Chinatown. So there's a garden in the basement of Chinatown Center that's called the Chinatown Anti-Displacement Rainbow / Zen Garden, depending on what you want to call it. And it's a beautiful community garden. I encourage everyone to visit. There's zucchini and corn and watermelons growing there right now. It's really lovely, and thank you to everyone who takes care of it. And our first meeting kind of officially as Friends of Chinatown was around this garden. And it was because we had learned about the proposal for 315, 325 Spadina, which is, as probably most of you know, it's where Roll San, the restaurant, is located, Ding Dong Bakery, many other small businesses. It's a very kind of iconic part of Chinatown. It's right in the heart of Chinatown at St. Andrews and Spadina. And what the developers are proposing there is a 13-story apartment rental building, which would completely change the character of the neighborhood. And I can talk about that a bit more later. But one of the first actions that we did as Friends of Chinatown was we made a fake city notice for development. So it looked like an official city notice, but we translated it into Chinese, and we brought up points around just what Chinatown actually is as a neighborhood. And I think what's really telling is that in the whole process of learning more about city planning and all of these arcane like development things, and our involvement in that planning process with the city, or kind of trying to interject or like put ourselves in opposition to it, is that everyone at the city and everyone who works at these development companies kind of basically refuse to acknowledge that Chinatown is like a unique neighborhood that has specific characteristics and has a specific role in Toronto, right? Like they hate saying the word Chinatown. At every meeting, they'll talk about Spadina and they'll talk about whatever, but they hate saying the word Chinatown. They hate acknowledging that this neighborhood is for immigrants, for racialized immigrants. So just to talk about this specific moment, what's happening right now without getting too deep into kind of like the city stuff is that we're at a crucial moment where the city is in a position, and we are in a position to influence the city in terms of the negotiations with the developer, and what kind of like community benefits might be squeezed out of this horrible building. But ultimately, I think the goal here in terms of us in this action together, writing both the city and the developers, hopefully the best outcome, I think, would be to shame the developer so much that they no longer want to build this building. So that would be the best outcome.
And that's why we're all here today. And yeah, they hate saying Chinatown. They hate acknowledging Chinatown, which is why a strategy that we've been using is just calling them racist, because like they hate it. And yeah, like I think actually you said this during like a global news interview back in like December. But yeah, Chinatown was created because of like historical legislative racism. And Beryl, I actually feel like you have a lot of context and in like just stories or whatever you want to share, and how like the larger history of resistance in Chinatown, because FOCT is quite new, but you know, Chinatown has always been a very activist centered neighborhood. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we have to sort of debunk ourselves of is the idea that we're model minorities, right? The idea is, and I mean, certainly legislators treat us as if we are like law-abiding people that will defer to higher powers or the powers that be. And that's not really the case. And I think that the major piece around this is that, you know, we have an active history of resistance, and we have an active history of subversion. So basically, I just want to take you back to 1902. I know that was a long time ago, but in 1902, there were 96 Chinese laundries operating in Toronto, specifically in the ward. And in the rest of the whole city of Toronto and its environs, there were only 66 other laundries, and people preferred going to Chinese laundries. They were very important to the townspeople of that era, especially the wealthier ones. But the Toronto Laundry Association lobbied City Council. And the City Council actually decided that it would be a really good idea in June of 1902, yes, I'm getting into the granular stuff, to pass bylaw number 41. And the idea of that was that we were going to regulate all laundries, but we were going to regulate Chinese laundries, especially because people were worried that the Chinese were unhygienic. Okay, like, you know, do I need to remind people that we were bathing before the Europeans ever thought that it was a good idea to bathe? However, but you know, why let facts get in the way? So I think what was interesting was that the city then decided it'd be a really good idea. They were lobbied by the Laundries Association to impose a tax on Chinese laundries. And it was on Chinese only laundries within the ward, which is where Chinese communities were located. And the Chinese laundrymen and their families actually fought back quite actively. And they took to the streets and they were very active, and they began letter writing campaigns. And eventually what happened was that Toronto's first African Canadian alderman, we call them councillors now, so William Peyton Hubbard, decided this was not a really great idea. And so what he did was he kind of brokered a decrease so that Chinese laundries could pay between $5 and $20. Now, if you consider that at the time, in these days dollars, it's about $1,500, which is significant to us. Even now, it's significant to a really, really small business. So even then, when you're talking about very low margins of an immigrant community, they were huge. And more significantly, though, and this is the really exciting part because this is the part that got me engaged in Toronto's Chinatown, was that the old Chinatown International at 421 Dundas was where we spent over a decade and a half raising funds. We had all those banquets all the time, strategizing and actually taking really concrete action to repeal the Chinese head tax of 1923 and the Chinese Exclusion Act. And it was through this steady work over an extended period of time that we finally got redress in 2006. I mean, if you think about it, it's only been 14 years since redress, and at my age, that's a very short time. So I think that we really need to think of our community as one of resistance, but I think, and also of active survival. But I think we also are very activist in the sense that we're looking forward to future generations, and we try to right the wrongs of the past as a way of moving forward. You know, and those funds from that redress,
wow,
is significant.
And like, thank you so much for that context, you know, and like City Hall, where it is now, originally displaced the first Chinatown, you know, so like we are building on a legacy of activism, of resistance, of resilience. And so, Amy, I just wanted to ask you, like, what are your concerns about this current present development proposal?
Well, I think it's known that buildings like this will displace communities, especially lower income ones. Recently, we learned in a meeting that the developer speculated that a 1-bedroom at this development, which is supposed to be rental units, would cost $2,500 a month, right? And it's like 550 square feet. So according to kind of guidelines that different organizations and lots of thinkers have put together in terms of how much rent you should be paying according to income, if you were to pay $2,500 for a 1-bedroom, that means that in a year, you would need to be making around 100K, right? If you wanted to pay 30% of your income on rent. And the other major concern, aside from displacing the businesses that are already there and creating this giant shadow on the landscape, all of these things, is that it's a rental building, which maybe sounds better than condos, but actually really isn't, because as we know, what the Ford government has done is that they've repealed rent control on new buildings, right? So going forward, this building would basically be a way for the developers to just like print insane amounts of money, you know, because there'd be high turnover at the building, likely, considering how small the units are. There's not that many family-sized units that are 2 or 3 bedrooms. So the population would probably be pretty transient, and the developers could just keep raising the rent every time someone leaves or moves out. And so what we're demanding from the city today is we are making a demand for 100% affordable housing. There we go, there's the sign, thank you, Henya. That is geared to income, right? And permanent. And these are definitions that the city definitely doesn't abide by when the city talks about affordable housing. But these are principles that we need to fight for. And I think that it should be part of the discourse, shifting the discourse to constantly be pushing for permanent rent geared to income units. And this is what we're going to demand. And the other 2 things are about a moratorium on future new developments in Chinatown, as the city hasn't even done any kind of unique Chinatown study or like actually considered Chinatown as a neighborhood yet, right? Like this is only something that they've begun to think about since we started advocating in the neighborhood. And the third thing is also community control in terms of planning for Chinatown. And then just the last piece in terms of emailing the developers and calling them is we want to let them know that they can't just operate in the neighborhood in this way. Even though, you know, they're like, oh, well, you know, we live in capitalism, we can do anything we want. That's not true. We're going to email Barry Hauer at Reichman and Bernard Lutmer at Podium and just let them know that people are watching and that we'll fight back.
I was just going to say, I think demanding for 100% affordable housing is so bold, and it is like really like front and center, like we are not backing down. This is going to be for the people. We are for the people. Chinatown is for the people. So we have 3 minutes left. I was just wondering, maybe we could do a really fast, just like what could be a vision for Chinatown? You know, I think Amy touched on that a little bit at the end, but Beryl, I'd actually love for you to finish this segment with, you know, what could be a vision for Chinatown?
I think the larger vision of Chinatown is what we're saying, what we're talking about is about inclusion. And it's about the idea that we are all welcome here. And, you know, this was a place that was built by us for us, but we also took over the neighborhood. This is actually our third Chinatown that we're fighting for, you know? And what we want is for there to be inclusion, for there to be a community that there are investments in terms of social capital, right? In terms of basically being person-centered, and I think being accessible and affordable. And I think that that's not a vision that is too hard to realize if we imagine arts, if we imagine community centers. And I think for me, because I'm older and, you know, I'm nearing that 55 benchmark, that I work with a lot of seniors, and what they want to do is that they live in the tongs and all the old sort of surname associations with the old houses that are left over in Chinatown, and they want to lay their bones in Chinatown. They want to die in their homes, but at the same time, they still want their great-grandchildren having a place to call their own and to bring their non-Chinese friends to experience. And I think that those are things that we really need in this community, is that we don't want another international bubble tea conglomerate. What we want are family-owned businesses. What we want are small businesses that can, I think, revitalize the neighborhood and be community-focused.
Wow. I couldn't have said it better myself. I feel like what you just said is something that we at T-Base and you at Cecil and us at FOCT are all trying to actualize and manifest, and also FOCM as well, Friends of Kensington Market. Like, we really are in this together. And thank you so much, Amy and Beryl, for all that information. And now we're going to take 1 to 2 questions from the people. So if you want to just say your name and pronoun and ask a question.
It's Jessica. Yeah, I had a question about, so someone initially talked about how Chinatown, you know, is looked down upon, you know, the city councilors, they don't want to call basically like the area that is known as Chinatown even by that name. They want to call it what, Spadina and probably Dundas, I guess. So do they do that to other communities as well? Like Little Italy or like Greek Town, do they do that with them as well, or is it just Chinatown?
I think I can clarify a bit about that, where, so it was in these community consultation meetings at the beginning when they refused to refer to the neighborhood as Chinatown. And in terms of city planning, they don't think about the neighborhood, or they haven't yet thought about the neighborhood as Chinatown. I think that these kinds of struggles exist in other neighborhoods as well, because I know that I'm seeing lately groups advocating for Little Jamaica, which is Eglinton West, and the development that's happening there. So yeah, so in terms of like the city plan, they really think about these things that they call like avenues. Like Spadina is a big avenue, so they think about it in terms of like streets and stuff like that. And so this is part of the work, is trying to get them to recognize that Chinatown is a specific neighborhood.
It's quite predatory, right? In the sense that, like, the Chinatown that previously existed at Dundas and Elizabeth Street, it was like the Chinese built that out of nothing. And people were sort of like, oh, look at the high land values. We've got to move everybody along to the west. And the reality is that the Chinese were only able to move to the West as the Jewish community, which occupied that area, experienced social mobility and was able to move out to the suburbs. And so I think there's kind of a piece here where I feel that, yes, this is capitalism and it's very predatory. But I think there's also a piece where you can appeal to guilt, not just shame. Like, I'm Chinese, I'm good at shame, okay? But I'm not good at guilt. But I think the Reichmans and the people that represent them, who are people who are very active in terms of ensuring that things like anti-Semitism and racism and other forms don't emerge, are people that will be very open to being guilted around pieces around marginalization and creation of things and people being predatory. And I think reminding them of that fact might be helpful in some of our appeals. I mean, I know I'm certainly putting that into my appeal.
And you know what, Beryl? That is a great segue to the next part of the thing, which is the action part, the digital direct action.